The following is a project of our nonprofit newsroom. Support Midcoast Morning and local journalism today at chly.ca/donate. Local news doesn't survive without local support.
Hello and welcome to Midcoast Morning. I'm Joe Pugh. A pair of city councillors joined the leader of BC's Green Party in Nanaimo Thursday to call on senior government for more regulation around data centres. Green Party leader Emily Lowen called for a moratorium around AI data centres pending enhanced regulation of the industry.
We cannot afford to rush ahead to place blind faith in unaccountable corporations and jeopardize the vulnerable safe water supply of communities like Nanaimo. That is why I'm calling on our province to enact regulations that the federal government refuses to do. That is why I'm calling for a moratorium on AI data centers until the environmental, health, and data risks of these facilities are understood and regulated.
A company looking to build a data center in Nanaimo has received a development permit for a site on East Wellington Road. While there is no indication it will be a dedicated AI data center, community concerns about its potential water and power use prompted the city of Nanaimo to release a statement in the fall addressing expected water use at the facility. On Thursday, City Councillor Paul Manley spoke to some of those concerns at the press conference.
We have a data center now that's coming. It's been through the zoning process, the development permit process, and I think our staff have done a great job dealing with the hand that they've been dealt. But this is where the provincial government needs to step up in regulating how these data centers operate, how much water they use, how much noise they create, and how much energy they use.
In January, the province did launch a bid process for prospective data centers seeking energy from BC Hydro. They'll need to meet certain criteria. Successful applicants are expected to be notified in September, according to a government press release. A February water use covenant on the Nanaimo site set a $60,000 fee for the landowner if the site goes beyond certain thresholds for water use. At Thursday's press conference, Councillor Hilary Eastmure said she's heard a huge degree of concern from residents about the proposed data centre.
When I joined council, it was time to vote on the fourth reading for the data centre. So similar to Councillor Manley, I didn't have a chance to have a lot of my questions answered. And what I saw during the public hearing process and what I heard directly from residents was a huge degree of concern and serious questions and uncertainty around what was being said yes to when the rezoning happened for the data centre.
Today on the program, we'll hear from a computer science professor to answer some questions around how data centers work and to get his take on some of the factors at play in Nanaimo.
So my name is Martin Karsten. I'm a professor of computer science at the University of Waterloo. And my research is primarily concerned with the efficiency of system software. So what that means is I'm looking at the platforms that make the actual application software run, and I'm looking at ways of how to make that platform as efficient as possible.
Maybe real first principles. Could you just talk me through what is a data center? Maybe what are the different types of data centers and how do they actually work?
Right. At some level, a data center is just a room filled with computers. In the old days, not so long ago, institutions would have their own rooms filled with computers, server computers, i.e. Sort of back-end computers, not the ones that you would have on your desktop. And as sort of the problems that we solve as computers grow larger, people have realized that if we pack things fairly densely in the data center, that we could operate more efficiently than if everybody hosts their own server in their own basement, essentially. I would roughly distinguish between three types of data centers, sort of big data centers. One would be the type where a company just has a need for immense computational resources. A canonical example would be Meta, i.e. Facebook, WhatsApp, etc. So these folks have huge computing needs, they do not rent out the computers, they provide a service, right? The Facebook or Meta, WhatsApp or whatever service they provide to you in packaged form. But because of the sheer scale, they need huge data centers to facilitate that. Another type of data center that has come up sort of maybe 15 years ago are the ones that underpin what we call cloud computing. So here, a provider such as Google or AWS or Microsoft runs the data center, owns the computers, and then they provide you with what's typically called virtual machines. So you can essentially rent out a virtual computer that's running on their hardware and uses their services. And then the third type of data center, and that is the one I think we're talking about here with what you in Nanaimo is it's called a co-location setup. And here the operator primarily provides the physical space and some very basic services, electricity, cooling, probably internet connectivity to some extent, but the customer, you might already be able to influence that. And then as a customer, you would go in and normally I would say you as a customer, the company as a customer owns the computers and decides what's running on these computers, the actual hardware. So it's really more like a facility that provides space and very basic services. So if you want to layer this, right, then the co-location setup is where the customer has most control and most responsibility for what's going on in the data center. In cloud computing, all of this is kind of translated into a virtual area, and customers still have a lot of control over what they're doing in those data centers. And if it's a closed data center, like my first example, then you're obviously just the end user of the service that's being provided. If that makes sense.
So a co-location data center is just sort of like a big warehouse with all the infrastructure to host computers for whoever is the client of the company. Could you maybe walk me through like more detail about what that looks like from the business side of things?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, first of all, I'm an academic, right? I know things in principle. If I was a good businessman, then maybe I should have picked a different career. Um, so, um, So yeah, think of it as a warehouse, like as a storage facility, except the storage facility comes with electricity and cooling and rack space. And if you say, gee, I want to buy myself 8 servers and I want to put them all in a rack and I want to remotely operate them, then you would go to that company and sometimes you might go and purchase these servers, or you might ask the company to help you pick good servers. They would be going into in that rack. You would be paying some form of rent. I don't know what the actual business agreements look like, to what extent these are fixed or variable cost-based agreements. I presume it's mostly fixed because at the end of the day, it's electricity and cooling and space for the most part, and that of course is fixed, right? And then you do with these computers whatever you want.
So I'm going to share some info from the company that is looking to build a Nanaimo data center. They've got the development permit. The center itself doesn't exist, but they're called Maple Colo. On their website, it says Maple Colo, a leader in Canadian data centers, specializes in quantum-safe colocation and symmetric key distribution via DSKE technology. Our new facility in Nanaimo enhances protection against quantum threats, combining traditional expertise with innovative solutions to revolutionize data security. So when you hear that, what do you take away from that as far as how you would suspect that this is going to work, or what you think the data center would be used for?
So to be honest with you, I can't quite make sense of the quantum safety thing here. The notion of quantum safety for communication and for encryption is, of course, well known and reasonably well understood by the experts in the area. And this is primarily about how you set up your communication channels so that you use encryption tools that would not even be broken by a quantum computer. What I can't quite put together is when you're talking about a co-location facility, the customer would have typically control over these aspects, the communication aspects of computing. So the quantum safety would ultimately be sort of part of what the customer installs rather than the provider. Now, I'm not the security expert here, and so maybe I'm overlooking something, but at the end of the day, it doesn't fit together. I'm sorry. This whole quantum safety seems to be something that the customers, maybe the provider can offer some basic services that help customers set up quantum safe communication and encryption. But at the end of the day, it would be part of the customer's job. And in some sense, in a co-location facility, as a customer, you don't want the provider in your systems, right? You want to be in control. You need your data secured, to also potentially against the provider, depending on your regulatory regime or your business needs or whatnot. And then even more so, I can't quite make sense of how the provider would have their hands in the encryption and in the for storage and communication. So to some extent, this whole quantum safety bit doesn't make a lot of sense to me. That doesn't mean it's necessarily wrong or bad or whatever. It just, I can't quite put one and one together here when I read that description. Now, in principle, that being a co-location data center would make it exactly that. They will have a certain amount of space. They will have an envelope for, I assume they have an envelope of power they can draw, and then they can rent out that facility to customers who can put their computers there.
Midcoast Morning is part of our nonprofit newsroom project, supported by listeners like you. Keep this program on the air by funding it today with a monthly sustaining donation at chly.ca/donate. We've got tote bags and shirts if you need an incentive.
On today's program, I'm speaking with Martin Karsten, a professor of computer science at Waterloo University. We're talking about data centers. Last week, Provincial Green Party leader Emily Lowen held a press conference in Nanaimo calling for increased government regulation of the data center industry. The data center plan for East Wellington Road in Nanaimo has generated concern in the community, with the City of Nanaimo issuing a statement last fall addressing proposed water use at the facility. For today's story, I reached out to BC Hydro to ask about their permitting process. A representative said that while unable to comment on specific customers or applications, they did share that proposals around data centers are evaluated on a number of criteria, including willingness to pay above standard electricity rates, ability to curtail power requirements, and data sovereignty considerations. Projects of up to a maximum size of 145 megawatts are eligible to bid. Now back to my conversation with Martin Karsten. We hear the term closed-loop cooling system a fair bit when people are talking about data centers, and there are a few questions around it. I'm wondering if you can explain to me what exactly that term closed-loop cooling system means and how it works.
Right. So water plays a big role in cooling these systems, as just transporting the heat away from the systems. Computers produce, chips produce a certain amount of heat that you have to move away from the chip, otherwise it will stop working. Water plays a role in that. And then I understand you have two choices. You can either let the water, the essentially hot water that takes the heat away, you can let it evaporate, and then you're done. You've got rid of the heat, but then you need to continuously pump more water. Whereas in a closed loop system, you would have some other component, some whatever HVAC component can cool down the water so that you can run it again. I think essentially there's a trade-off between energy consumption and water consumption. If you can consume the water and just let it evaporate, you save the energy of cooling it down by some other means. And so I think a closed loop system would have a tendency to consume more energy and less water, whereas an open loop system would consume more water and less energy.
So basically, data centers use water to cool down the systems. Once that happens, the water is not going to be cool anymore, so it wouldn't work again. So you either need to replace that water with new water that is cool, or use a bunch of energy to cool the water back down.
And both of these systems are in use. And again, I'm not the expert in that area to actually give you the numbers that is at what size or scale is one more efficient or the other, or at what in what locale I mean, obviously, if you're somewhere where you're next to a hydro dam, electricity is sort of free and plenty, right, and green of sorts, right, then you could argue, I'll just sort of clearly a closed loop system makes a lot of sense, right, because energy might be free pretty much. If you have free access to water, then the open loop system and energy is very expensive, then the open loop system might make a lot more sense.
One of the big talking points around data centers in general these days is data sovereignty. And I'm wondering if there's anything you can tell me about how someone who's not an expert in any of this can make sense of how a data center would need to be organized or run or owned to be functionally doing anything on the issue of data sovereignty.
Functionally, it's not that big a deal. I mean, the data center would need to be physically located, say in Canada, if you're looking for Canadian sovereignty, and you need to make sure that the operator of the data center is not legally beholden to some other government. I mean, we had these discussions with the multinational cloud providers that even when their data centers were overseas, they would still have to answer to U.S. jurisdiction when it comes to producing data, for example, from these overseas data centers. So ideally, you have a data center in Canada run by a Canadian operator that sort of does not have an overwhelming footprint in the US, so can be, or in other countries, and sort of doesn't have to answer to other countries' authority, and then that would be sovereign.
And if we're talking about the general umbrella of data centers as an issue and people's concerns, there's maybe a big specific chunk of that is looking at AI and data centers used for AI. And I'm wondering if you can explain to me in a little bit of detail what that piece is like and where it fits into the overall data center puzzle.
So AI computations are different from the type of computations that were run in data centers up until sort of before AI or for other services. Right? AI computations are mathematically advanced, but computationally rather dumb and straightforward. And that's why you can use a different type of chips. And it turned out that what people did for graphics computing a while ago fits the bill very well. So these types of chips that originate in graphics computing, the graphics processing units, the GPUs that everybody's talking about, they are very well suited to run these AI computations. Now, these AI computations, while mathematically advanced, computationally dumb, you can run them on a massive scale, and you have to run them on a massive scale, like having a million things going on at the same time, all the time, in order to produce these nice results that AI-enhanced search engines, for example, or classification techniques give you. So it's just the scale of things has exploded, and it is technically feasible. But what that means is that the actual sort of both capital expenses in terms of buying these chips, as well as operating expenses in terms of the energy that you need and the heat that you produce, have just seen an unprecedented sort of spike in the last couple of years with the introduction of AI services. And so a rule of thumb, and I'm not sure, I mean, there's people throw around numbers. It's notoriously hard to sort of really put your finger down and say what the real number is. But my gut feeling right now, and there was a paper from Google about a year or two ago, sort of, I find that somewhat plausible, is that if you compare the overhead of, say, running a traditional Google search versus running the AI query that goes with it right now, right, pretty much automatically, that the AI query might be 20 times more expensive in terms of power consumption than the traditional search query. And so now you do the math, right? I mean, how many Google searches do we run every day? And everything all of a sudden becoming like 10 or 20 times more expensive in terms of resource consumption. That's a massive spike of resource consumption in the aggregate, right?
When people are flagging concerns around AI data centers and power and water use specifically, for example, in Nanaimo last week, the leader of the Provincial Green Party was here for a press conference calling for a moratorium on AI data centers, also making a reference to the fact that there has been this opposition to this co-location data center in Nanaimo. People are going to be asking, well, isn't this facility in Nanaimo for storage? Isn't it not AI? I'm just wondering, what kind of context do you think it's important to have on that issue and that distinction?
I mean, it sounds to me from the publicly available description that this particular facility is not as bad as sort of a pure AI data center that would be run by a company like OpenAI or these well-known AI service providers. But of course, the devil is in the details. At the end of the day, is it whatever the customers bring to that data center, right? In terms of computing workload. So yes, I mean, the AI just dramatically increases the resource consumption. You can ask yourself, is that worth our while? Are we willing to spend these resources, right? Is it even economically feasible in the long term? Right now, there's tons of money being poured into AI services, right? I don't think the economic feasibility of all these services has really been established yet. But then again, you could have said the same thing 25 years ago when Google started out with internet search, right? So it's really hard to predict. But clearly, in a data center that would be predominantly used for AI computations, would use a lot more energy, and then depending on open closed loop, whatever, same for water, right? Compared to a data center that would be used for more traditional forms of computing.
In the case of Nanaimo, the development permit has been granted to the data center. There's a covenant around water use where there's a clause that suggests the owners would pay the city around $60,000 a year if the annual water use exceeds 25.2 million liters of water per year. Apparently, it's expected to account for about 0.2% of the total water use in the city. Maybe about 1% of the total kind of commercial and industrial water use in the city. Is there any kind of context you can give me on that issue of water use and people's concerns about this sort of, obviously the company would pay whatever the water use rates are, and then maybe this one-time payment if they exceed?
Yeah, I guess if I was you, I would feel more comfortable if there was a hard cap. Like $60,000 sounds awfully cheap to sort of break that cap, right? In the grand scheme of things.
Well, you've suggested that the way these co-location data centers tend to work is that whoever wants to store their stuff kind of comes with their own systems and their own concerns. And so I would imagine that would kind of influence how much water or power the thing would need to use in the first place. What kind of context is that?
That's why you would want to negotiate a hard cap up front, right? And not give anybody an option to exceed that cap, and that cap needs to be sensible. I mean, this is an economic endeavor. It needs to make sense of sorts for everybody. But if somebody tells you, look, this data center will mostly host traditional computations, well, then we can size up the energy and the water that we need for that, and then we put a hard cap on it. And then if all of a sudden customers show up with AI workloads, then the operator would have to say, sorry, we can't accommodate that here, right? I mean, the other question is always when it comes to data centers is sort of, I mean, you have three resources, right? You have the real estate, the land, right? And there isn't really much of a need for data centers to occupy prime real estate. I mean, there are some economic reasons where some folks, the high frequency trading folks, want to be physically close to the stock exchanges just to have very low latency in their communications. Your distance directly translates into latency. But for most other reasons, there isn't really a need for prime real estate, right? In terms of jobs, oftentimes data centers do not come with a lot of jobs once they're operational. But you also don't want to fall into some sort of NIMBY trap, right? At the end of the day, I think for Canada, it is important that we have our own data centers for sovereignty and just for general sort of technological prowess, right? So you got to make all that work, right? And so I think a community like Nanaimo needs to just ask themselves, okay, so how much are we willing to allocate to this, and then stick to it.
Is there anything else you think it's important to bring to the conversation today on this issue of data centers, water and power use, or what you see about the specific one in Nanaimo?
Right. I mean, I think sovereignty is extremely important, and so to me that is an important aspect that we need to worry about. I also think that we should constantly invest in making things more efficient. And then the remainder is just finding the right locales, finding those locales where, again, the water and the electricity usage and the land usage causes the least damage, right? It's what you do with any industrial site, right? You trade off sort of the job value, the industrial value per se, compared to the resource input, right? And you need to ask yourself the questions and then say yes or no, right? I do understand that people are worried about that things kind of run away from them, right? You agree to something today and then 5 years later it looks a lot different. So that is of course something that you would want to find some sort of protection against, right? But then again, I also understand there's always the matter of sort of municipal versus provincial versus federal regulation and who runs the show on what. And we have similar problems here in Kitchener-Waterloo and the province of Ontario with water usage and whatnot, right? So it's easier said than done. I understand that in terms of the regulatory frameworks, right? But at the end of the day, you allocate a water envelope, you allocate an energy envelope, and you allocate land, and the company either has a business case or they haven't, right? And if parameters drastically change 5 years down the road for anybody involved, then you got to reevaluate, right? And you got to, company needs to come back and say, now we need twice as much energy to make this worth our while. Well, then you got to reevaluate whether that's still doable or not.
Martin Karsten, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me.
Thank you. Take care.
Martin Karsten is a professor of computer science at the University of Waterloo. We reached out to a representative for the company behind the planned Nanaimo data center, but did not hear back ahead of production. That's our show for the day. Thank you for joining me. I'm Joe Pugh, host and producer of Midcoast Morning. Jesse Woodward is our executive producer, and RB Frew is our technical advisor. You can sign up for CHLY's newsletter at chly.ca/subscribe. If you have a story you'd like us to cover, you can email us at news@chly.ca. Our theme song is First One by local Nanaimo band Waste Management. That's all for now. We'll talk to you on another Midcoast Morning.
This program gives thanks to the Nanaimo First Nation as we broadcast and podcast from their traditional territory. Thanks for listening.